I'm Tim Riley. I'm an assistant professor of journalism at Emerson College. I taught 2 courses this term. I taught the digital journalist, which is required for freshman and sophomore majors, which is all about the different digital platforms that we're working on now as journalists. And I taught Introduction to Music Criticism. Music journalism, that's my specialty, that's my background, so this is a way of introducing people to the craft of music journalism. What we do is we cover the history of classic rock in there, and we start with Elvis and rock and roll exploding in the 50s, and then we move on to the 60s, and we spend a lot of time in the 60s with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan. And we read some of the great essays that have been written about these classic bands. We talk about what makes them classic, what makes them so much a part of their era, what separates them from their era, what properties in their music helps them transcend their era, makes their music still relevant today, and how we go about constructing this myth of rock and roll, and why the myth of rock and roll is still very much with us in pop culture, and how most of the artists working today still subscribe to that myth and play into that myth. So the course is designed so that students who confront today's popular culture with Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber and Bruno Mars, they have a sense of context of where all that stuff comes from. And once they have that larger rock and roll myth in their heads, they're able to approach today's acts with some sense of history. We march students through 4 major platforms that we're noticing that a lot of the major news networks and organizations are working in now. So those are all web platforms. So we start out with audio, and we listen to some NPR, and we do some best practices work on how to put together a good radio story and how to do man on the streets using audio. And we produce several audio stories. Then we move to still pictures with and without audio. So we use sound slides, and we talk about photography journalism and how stories get told in visual terms, and then how certain stories in visual terms can be aided with audio. Certain stories in visual terms don't need audio. We talk about the difference between those kinds of stories. And then we move on to film and video, and we create stories usually using, again, man-on-the-street interviews to construct really simple stories, but we introduce students to Final Cut Pro, and then we put different versions of all of those stories that they work on. We put that up on the web through a WordPress blog format, so we introduce them to a blogging platform, content management system, and we also dabble in some social media stuff, so they'll put together a news blog by the end of that course that incorporates all those different platforms into a web platform. From my point of view, reporting is a big part of criticism, what can separate good criticism from bad criticism. It's not just spilling your thoughts and ideas onto the page. It's really about developing sources, talking to other experts in the field, figuring out which sources of yours are most trustworthy and telling the truth, doing a lot of verification of the things you're getting told. You know, this person told this story, another person tells another story. Do they jibe? If they don't jibe, what might be the possible reasons for that? Who can help you with that if there's contradictions there? So criticism also always needs to be supported by a lot of good shoe leather reporting. And that's a very basic piece of what I try and bring to my critical teaching. The web is just really radically changing the way journalism gets practiced and the way people seek and consume information. And what we're seeing is a broad new variety, ways of communicating, spread across a much larger spectrum than simply television and newspapers, to a much more customized and real-time offering of information across a variety of platforms. And the journalists of tomorrow are going to need to know how to speak across a wide variety of platforms. And that's what we teach here.